Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 45, which is the final UFC event. This is the final podcast of 2021 and it's headlined with a heavyweight fight between Derrick Lewis and Chris Daukaus. And this is a really interesting fight. I'm known, unfortunately, for somebody that bets against Derrick Lewis just because his skills and qualities just aren't physically up there with the best in the division, but the reason why he's ranked so highly is just because he's got monster power. I bet against Derrick Lewis against a wrestler in Curtis Blades. I bet against Derrick Lewis in a grappler in Oleinik. I bet against Derrick Lewis in a technical striker with Alexander Volkov, but Derrick Lewis just keeps knocking these guys out. And with Chris Daukaus, the exact same thing could happen, but again, I'm finding myself picking against Derrick Lewis once again because Chris Daukaus is a good technical striker. He's got good movement himself. Even though he looks quite big, he moves really well. He's fast for the weight class. And I do think from that technical standpoint, the boxing, the movement, the combinations, the volume, the cardio, it all checks up with Chris Daukaus. But the problem always lies is Derrick Lewis just needs to land one punch, and if it doesn't knock you out cold, it'll hurt you, it'll rock you, enough for Derrick Lewis to start the beginning of the end. So it's always difficult picking against Derrick Lewis, but in this fight I have to go with the fighter who I believe is the better mixed martial artist, the more athletic fighter, the faster fighter, the quicker mover, and that's Chris Daukaus. Again, be careful. Derrick Lewis can knock any fighter out on the planet. It only takes one, but I am picking Chris Daukaus to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Belal Muhammad. I think this is a really difficult fight for Belal Muhammad. For someone to beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, you've got to have a couple of things, or at least one of a couple of things. You've got to either have brutal power to be able to put him out, or you've got to be able to have the wrestling and the topside grappling, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu to be able to take him down and keep him down. One of those two things, or ideally both of those two things, is enough to beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. But if you don't have those things, then Wonderboy is going to be a very difficult fighter for you to beat. He's a puzzle that not many fighters have been able to solve. He's one of the best strikers that we've ever seen in the UFC. He's got a karate background. You see that in the karate stance. He switches stances beautifully, darts in and out of range. He's got really good, strong fight IQ, and he's also got a good awareness of danger as well. He knows when to back out, when it's time to get out of there, reset and go again. And the thing is with Belal Muhammad, I don't think he's got the power to knock Wonderboy out. Obviously, a puncher's chance, 4-ounce gloves, it's MMA, anything can happen. But, from a high probability perspective, Belal Muhammad, it's very unlikely that he's going to knock Wonderboy out. And Belal Muhammad has decent wrestling, but if he does manage to take Wonderboy down, I don't think he's got the elite BJJ like Gilbert Burns had, for example, to be able to keep Wonderboy on the mat either. I think this fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. We saw what happened to Belal Muhammad the last time he fought a high-level striker in Leon Edwards. Obviously, that fight was rendered a no contest because of the eye poke, but before that, Leon Edwards was piecing him up. And I think if Leon Edwards is doing that to Belal Muhammad, then Wonderboy can absolutely do that to him as well. I think this is Wonderboy's fight to lose. Like I say, I just really struggle to see Belal Muhammad do what he needs to do in order to beat somebody like Wonderboy. So I'm picking Stephen Thompson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Amanda Lemos versus Angela Hill. And I'm really surprised by the betting line, first of all, here, with Angela Hill being a 3-1 underdog in this fight. I kind of understand to an extent why Hill would be an underdog in this fight. Lemos has looked good lately. She's looked aggressive, strong, powerful. But Angela Hill has fought the best of the best. She's still competing with the best of the best. This is going to be the best fighter that Lemos has faced in the UFC by quite a long way. Now, it is also one of those fights where the aggression, the forward pressure and the power of Lemos is always going to be a problem for her opponents, but I think Angela Hill's the more technical fighter, so the more technical striker. So Angela Hill, I don't think has got the power or the knockout power to be knocking Lemos out. Lemos has probably got the knockout power to knock Hill out, but it's going to be one of them where if this fight does go to a decision, it's going to be the power shots versus the volume, because Angela Hill packs a ton of volume in her fights. And again, I just don't agree with the betting line. I don't think it should be this wide. I think the line should be much, much closer. And I do feel that Angela Hill has got past the victory with the Muay Thai, the striking, the speed, the movement. And like I said, if this fight does go to a decision, I think there could be a takedown or two maybe along the way, but I don't think that the wrestling and the groundwork, the grappling is going to be enough to make this fight or to be a key factor in this fight. So I do believe the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. I think it could be a really close fight, and I'm actually going to side with the underdog in Angela Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Raphael Assuncao versus Ricky Simón. Now, I think Assuncão's in a really tough position himself in this fight. He's a 39-year-old bantamweight, which is very old for the weight class. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. His best days are behind him. I don't think he's a washed up or declined fighter. I still think there's going to be some competitive moments in this fight, but Ricky Simón is just an absolute nightmare to deal with. His relentless wrestling, couple that with his pace, his pressure, his cardio, just constantly coming forwards. To beat somebody like Ricky Simón, you first got to combat that pace, that pressure, that cardio, those issues that are really going to force you on the back foot and just be an absolute nightmare for you. And that's before you even start to try and break down his style and beat him inside a mixed martial arts fight. And I do think from a striking perspective, Assuncao probably does have the edge in striking, but Ricky Simón is constantly developing in that area. His striking is okay. It's going to be enough to be competitive. But I think where this fight is going to be won and lost is in the wrestling department, in the clinch department. And I say clinch because Ricky Simón's topside BJJ isn't that great. So I do think when he's taking Assuncao down, Assuncao will be able to get back up to his feet. But the fact is, Ricky Simón will just keep coming and coming. It'll be waves of takedowns. He'll be scoring 6, 7, 8 plus takedowns. And even when you're not getting some decent top control, when you're in those sort of numbers of takedowns in a fight, then the judges aren't going to ignore it. Sure, if you score 1 or 2 takedowns in a fight and don't do anything topside, then the judges will probably ignore it, but not when you're scoring a high amplitude of takedowns. We see the same thing from Merab Dvalishvili as well. And I think Ricky Simón is going to have that type of performance. I think Assuncao might be a little bit dangerous early on the feet striking, but once Ricky Simón gets his wrestling going, I think it'll just be takedown after takedown. Once Assuncao stands back up, it'll just be rinse and repeat. I think it's going to be a pace that Ricky Simón sets in this fight. He's going to be in Assuncao's face constantly, and I just don't think Assuncao is going to be able to deal with that pace and that pressure and the wrestling and the relentless takedown. So I'm picking Ricky Simón to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a really good fight. I think it's my favourite fight on the card. We've got Diego Ferreira versus Mateusz Gamrot. And this, like I say, is such a really, really good fight. And it's difficult with Ferreira because Ferreira's got legitimate skills in mixed martial arts. His striking has improved from a couple of years ago. I do think it might have plateaued a little bit, meaning that I just don't think he's developing to the level or to the speed he was, a couple of years ago. But he's still a decent striker. But it's his jiu-jitsu that is absolutely solid. We saw that in his last fight against Gregor Gillespie. The scrambles were insane. And you can just see in those scrambling moments that Ferreira is just so solid on the mat. But the problem that Ferreira has is that he fades with his grappling if he's facing another grappler. And the thing is with Gamrot, he's a very similar style to that of Gregor Gillespie, to that of Beneil Dariush, 2 fighters that have had their way with Ferreira on the mat. Now, the thing is with Gamrot's a really good grappler himself. He's an ADCC champion. He regularly competes in grappling tournaments, and that's going to help him in this fight if he decides to shoot for a takedown. Now, I personally don't think Gamrot's going to shoot for many takedowns in this fight. I think he's going to try and keep this fight on the feet. I'm just saying if he goes to the mat with Ferreira, he's probably going to be okay. And that is where Ferreira would normally like to really thrive against his opponent. But I just don't think he's going to have those huge advantages on the mat like he would with another opponent. So Gamrot will be okay on the ground, in the grappling. And if he wants to take Ferreira down, I think he'll be able to stay safe, wear him down, and land ground and pound. And the longer the fight goes on, Gamrot will have more success with that wrestling. But on the feet is where I actually think this fight is won and lost. I think Gamrot's a good technical striker. He's got power, he's got good technique, he doesn't rush in, he's not reckless in there, he's defensively aware, and he does just enough with his striking to be clean, crisp, and just slowly pull away with the fight. And I just think he's genuinely a better striker than Diego Ferreira. Now, for Ferreira to win this fight, in my opinion, he's got to get topside of Gamrot. That's where he's really going to have his edge in this fight, if it's Ferreira on top. But to get on top of Gamrot, Ferreira's got to get his wrestling going, and I just don't think his wrestling is going to be good enough to consistently take Gamrot down, to settle him on the mat and really start causing problems. I think Gamrot's takedown defense will hold up, and if he does get taken down a couple of times, like I've already mentioned, his jiu-jitsu is good enough to use it from a defensive perspective to get back up to the feet, and I think Gamrot does some really good work on the feet. Stylistically, I just think it's a difficult fight for Diego Ferreira. I love Diego Ferreira. I think he's a solid fighter with legitimate skills, but styles make fights, and for me, this one's Gamrot's. I'm picking Mateusz Gamrot to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a battle between two veterans. We've got Darren Elkins versus Cub Swanson, and this is going to be a really interesting fight. You know, a lot of people didn't expect Darren Elkins to beat Darrick Minner last time out, but he not only beat him, but he finished him. And Cub Swanson has been on a little bit of a resurgence himself after coming back from some injuries. I think it's a perfect fight for both fighters, but I do understand why Cub Swanson's a 2-1 favourite in this fight. I think Cub Swanson's just got more in the tank from an offensive perspective, and I just think that he's got more left in the tank from a durability perspective. You know, the wars, the reason Darren Elkins has got damage tattooed across his chest is because of the wars he's been in, and those wars add up. Every single fight he gets hurt, he gets cut up, there's blood, and I just think Cub Swanson's still technically sound enough to be able to piece together good combinations on the feet, really make Darren Elkins start chasing the fight, try and make Darren Elkins counter-strike, and I think making Elkins counter-strike will give Cub Swanson opportunities to find more openings offensively as well. And I just think it's going to be a bit of a boxing clinic from Cub Swanson. He's just got to watch that takedown and watch the clinch and the grind work of Darren Elkins, because that's where Darren Elkins will win this fight should he win. I just don't think Cub Swanson, with him being a veteran and he's got good fight IQ, he's been in there, he's faced pretty much everyone there is to be faced at the top of the division. I just don't think he allows Darren Elkins just to wear on him, to grind on him and to take him down and just cause problems. I think Cub Swanson is going to be able to keep this fight on the feet, and I think he's going to be able to dictate the pace, get in and out of range, landing good combinations, good shots, body shots, head shots, putting everything together nicely. So I'm picking Cub Swanson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Gerald Meerschaert versus Dustin Stoltzfus, and Gerald Meerschaert's a big favourite in this fight. I think the line might be a little bit too wide, but I do definitely understand why Meerschaert is the favourite. Meerschaert is actually sort of on a bit of a resurgence himself. He had to weather a storm against Mahmoud Muradov in his last fight, and Mahmoud Muradov is a fighter that I'm really, really high on. I think he's a really talented fighter, so for Gerald Meerschaert to be a huge underdog in that fight, weather the storm, come back and finish Muradov, that's credit to him. Gerald Meerschaert is one of these fighters where his striking's okay, his wrestling's okay, his grappling's actually really good, and that's the best part of his game. But his striking and his wrestling is slowly catching up to his level in regards to the grappling. And at this level in the UFC, against fighters like Dustin Stoltzfus, for example, I think Gerald Meerschaert's going to be fine. It's when he really takes the step up in competition and he starts fighting ranked opponents, you know, top 10, top 15, that's where he's really going to start struggling. But right here, right now, in this type of fight against Dustin Stoltzfus, who's a very similar fighter to Meerschaert himself, he's got decent striking, decent wrestling, decent grappling. I just feel that Meerschaert might have all bases covered in this fight. I think in the striking department, it's going to be really close. Stoltzfus might have the edge there, but when it comes to the wrestling and the grappling, I think Meerschaert's going to have more than enough to be able to deal with someone like Stoltzfus. And I think throughout the 15 minutes, Gerald Meerschaert will grow into this fight. His striking will start picking up a little bit the longer it goes on. There might be some takedowns. If there's takedowns, there's going to be some good top control time for Meerschaert as well. So like I say, I just feel that he's got all bases covered. He's the fighter that is an absolute veteran, more experienced, fought the better level of competition inside the UFC. I'm picking Gerald Meerschaert to win this fight. And in the next fight, this could potentially be the fight of the night, in my opinion. We've got Raoni Barcelos versus the newcomer Victor Henry. Now, if you don't know anything about Victor Henry, this guy is wild strikes. He throws an absolute variety of kicks at his opponents. Crazy kicks, athletic, follows it up with straight punches. Always in the face of his opponent, always aggressive. He's got good takedowns as well. He's got a slick submission game. This guy is going to be a lot of fun to watch, and he will win fights in the UFC. I can guarantee that. I'm just not quite sure he's going to win this fight against Raoni Barcelos, but I definitely think it's going to be competitive in moments. And Raoni Barcelos opened this fight as a -285 favourite. He's been a bigger favourite against more experienced UFC veterans in the past, so that's a testament to Victor Henry in regards to how good he is. The fact that Barcelos is only -285 compared to what he's been in the past. But the problem with Victor Henry for me is his defense. He's not defensively aware. He's a little bit reckless. And I think he's going to try and take what he's been doing on the regional scene into the UFC against a top fighter like Raoni Barcelos. And I think he's just going to hit a brick wall and get unstuck. I think Barcelos is not as wild, but he's going to be able to counter the aggression of Victor Henry. Is going to be able to land some hard shots to the body, to the head. I think Barcelos can score takedowns himself in this fight. He will have to be careful of the submission game on bottom of Victor Henry, who will be throwing his legs up to look for arm bars and look for triangles to sweep and reverse. But the things that work on the regional scene just don't work quite as well in the UFC, especially not when you're fighting against a top opponent like Raoni Barcelos. I think Victor Henry is going to do well in this fight. I think he's going to be competitive, but I do think that from an overview of the fight, from a general perspective, that Raoni Barcelos is just going to be able to counter everything that Victor Henry does and apply offense back at him, and it's just going to be a problem for Victor Henry the longer the fight goes on. I do like Barcelos to take over from a cardio perspective as well. So there's a couple of angles here for Raoni Barcelos, and I do think he gets the job done in a very exciting fight, potentially fight of the night. I'm picking Raoni Barcelos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Justin Tafa versus Harry Hunsucker. Harry Hunsucker is definitely a front-running fighter, a first-round fighter, loves to come out there. He's predominantly a striker, good movement, good speed, good power, loves to come through and try and buzzsaw his opponents. But like I said about Jourdain Wright last week, Harry Hunsucker tends to be a fighter that will slice through his opponents at a certain level. And I think that certain level is outside of the UFC, unfortunately. I'm not saying Harry Hunsucker won't ever win a fight in the UFC, but I think he's definitely going to have more difficulties, and he's going to have to adapt his game and just not think that he can just run through these guys in the UFC, because it's not going to happen as easily as what it does outside of the UFC. And I think with Justin Tafa, it's a bad matchup for Harry Hunsucker, because Justin Tafa will happily stand and strike. That's what he wants to do. Tafa doesn't want to wrestle. Tafa doesn't want to grapple. He wants to stay on the feet, stand and strike. That's where his bread and butter lies, that's where his power lies, and I just think that Justin Tafa is the better technical striker from, like I say, a technical boxing and kickboxing standpoint, but he's also the fighter with more power, and I think he's just a more skilled mixed martial artist. He's got more experience in the UFC as well, so that's why I am on the side of Justin Tafa, who likely knocks Hunsucker out early. And if he doesn't, then I do think that Justin Tafa has got the ability to go 3 rounds and win a decision as well. I'm picking Justin Tafa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sijara Eubanks versus Melissa Gatto. Now, I never thought I'd be picking Melissa Gatto to win a fight in the UFC, but actually in this podcast I am, because when I watched her fights outside of the UFC before she came in, honestly, she looked a bit of a journeywoman, if you like. I just didn't understand why the UFC kept booking her into fights at all. But the thing is, she had a 3-year layoff before that UFC debut. So her last fight before the UFC debut, and in a UFC debut, she looked absolutely on point. She looked like a completely different fighter. She was a fighter that beforehand looked like just a grappler. She was getting taken down constantly, but in a UFC debut, her takedown defense held up well, her wrestling looked good, her striking looked sharp, it was accurate, there was plenty of volume, there was power behind it, to the point where the grappler no longer needed the grappling to win the fight, because she was such a good striker. So the developments that Gatto has made was unbelievable. I'm a little bit unsure why she's such a big underdog in this fight now. Sijara Eubanks, she's got the skills, she's got the ability, she's got the experience in the UFC, but her performances are so hit and miss, they're so inconsistent. One week she could look absolutely phenomenal, amazing gas tank, beautiful combinations for 3 rounds, and then the next fight, a gas tank can look a little bit short, the combinations aren't there, she looks flat, just really inconsistent performances. But I think that with Melissa Gatto, because she's so young, her developments are going to be constant. She's going to be making constant developments, fight between fights, fight after fight, rapid developments. And I do feel that this fight could be very, very close. And I feel like Gatto could end up pulling away with this fight, especially if we see a much better version of her this time to what we saw last time. I'm actually siding with the underdog here. I'm picking Melissa Gatto to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Charles Jourdain versus Andre Ewell. Now, talking about fighters that are really inconsistent, Charles Jourdain for me is the epitome of that. He's a fighter that for me is athletic. On his day, he looks really good. He's sharp, he's accurate, he mixes his punches, he kicks in really well, he's got some decent takedowns, good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu. But the problem that Jourdain has, like I said, is consistency. And unfortunately, against weaker level opposition to what he's got facing him on Saturday night in Andre Ewell, he's had problems with, and just not being able to deal with what the lower level competition is offering in the UFC, and I think that's going to be a problem in this fight with Andre Ewell. Now, Andre Ewell isn't also the epitome of consistency, but I do think that he's fought the better level of competition. He's fought Jonathan Martinez, he's fought Chris Gutierrez, he's fought Julio Arce, he's fought some decent strikers in the UFC, and every single fight is relatively close with Ewell, even if he loses. So against Charles Jourdain, who's not that consistent, who can have an off night, I do tend to trust Andre Ewell just a little bit more than Jourdain. And I do think that Andre Ewell on the feet, especially early, is going to have a speed advantage. He's so quick in and out of the pocket, his movement's good. But on the flip side, the only concern with Ewell is he can slow down a little bit. So I think it's going to be Ewell early, Jourdain late, but I think that Ewell's going to be able to do enough early in round 1, early in round 2 to be able to take this fight. So I'm picking Andre Ewell to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Raquel Pennington versus Macy Chiasson. Macy Chiasson taking this fight on short notice. And I think it's a really bad fight for her, if I'm being honest. Macy Chiasson, she's young still, she's got room for development. But Raquel Pennington, even though she's getting on a little bit now, she's old, she's a veteran, but she's still a dog inside that cage. She's an absolute grinder. Her striking's good, her wrestling's decent, her jiu-jitsu's decent. She's just a difficult fighter to deal with. And actually, when you look at the losses that Raquel Pennington's taken, it's only ever been to top level competition. When she's fought outside of that top 3 to 5 in the rankings, she's normally been fine. And I think that's going to be pretty much the same case in this fight. I think Chiasson will have her moments. Chiasson is tall, she's long, she's aggressive. Her striking, she likes to get in the face of her opponent. She's got okay takedowns. She's best in the clinch. But these are all positions where I don't think she's going to present Raquel Pennington any issues that Pennington hasn't dealt and faced with before. And I think that's going to be the real game changer in this fight. I think Pennington's going to be okay wherever the fight goes. And I think she's going to be able to grind away, pull away with this fight. And I'm picking Raquel Pennington to win this fight. And in the next fight in the heavyweight division, we've got Don'Tale Mayes versus Josh Parisian. Now, in my opinion, no disrespect, it's a little bit of a low-level heavyweight fight here. I think that the betting line with Don'Tale Mayes being a near 2-1 favourite is way off. I think the line should be much closer. I think Josh Parisian has got a better chance of winning here than what the betting line suggests. But it's difficult for me to trust either fighter. I think it's a fight that's going to play out on the feet. I'd be surprised if there's any wrestling, if there's any grappling. And both fighters have shown that they're okay in moments. Both fighters have shown that they can slow down a little bit. But I do think that Don'Tale Mayes is the slightly more athletic fighter, is the fighter that's likely to land slightly more volume. I think Josh Parisian has slowed down badly now a couple of times in the UFC. So I do trust the cardio a little bit more of Don'Tale Mayes as well. So although I do believe that the line is too wide in this fight, I do believe the volume, the speed, the movement and the cardio does slightly edge with Don'Tale Mayes. But listen, if Josh Parisian comes into this fight and does a good job, puts the Don'Tale Mayes on the back foot, pressures and takes 2 out of the 3 rounds, I'm not going to be too surprised. But like I say, right now I do think the slightly better fighter who has the better attributes in the areas that should matter in this heavyweight fight is Don'Tale Mayes. So I'm picking Don'Tale Mayes to win this fight. And finally, in the last breakdown, the last fight of this podcast, we've got Matt Sayles returning after a 3-year layoff versus Jordan Levitt. This fight's a pick'em. I totally understand why. You've got Matt Sayles, who is definitely going to be the better striker, and you've got Jordan Levitt that's definitely going to be the better grappler. And I think that's exactly what we see in this fight. This fight could go in 2 different avenues. I think if this fight stays on the feet, Matt Sayles, like I say, the better striker, better combinations, harder punches, loves to be aggressive in the face of his opponents, mixes things up between his boxing, his low kicks, his kickboxing. Everything on the feet is just going to be mixed up much better than Sayles. And actually, one real concern of Jordan Levitt is how bad he tired in his last fight. We'd not really seen him too many times go past the first round, but we did in his last fight against Claudio Puelles, and his cardio just really didn't check out. So that's definitely a concern for Levitt. Now we've seen that. But if Levitt does or is able to get his wrestling going, take Matt Sayles down, get on top of him, use the grappling to really smother Sayles, that's where Sayles has shown holes before. Now, admittedly, those holes were against Bryce Mitchell, who is, that loss to Bryce Mitchell has aged beautifully for Matt Sayles, because Bryce Mitchell's one of the best fighters in the division. We know that now. At the time, it looked like an even fight. I don't even think Bryce Mitchell was much of a favourite in that fight, but that was against Bryce Mitchell. Jordan Levitt isn't at that level, but We've seen enough holes in the grappling of Mateusz to think that Jourdain Levitt is going to be able to have a good time should he take him down. I'm actually opting for Mateusz to get taken down a little bit in round 1, survive, tire Jourdain Levitt out by making him work hard on top, and then in the second round, in the third round, his takedown defense should hold up a little bit better if Levitt has tired. The combinations will be put together. He'll start to light Jourdain Levitt up on the feet the longer the fight goes on. There is a chance that Jourdain Levitt does submit Mateusz early on in that first round, because Levitt is a very, very good and tricky grappler to deal with, good submission game. But I am siding with Mateusz, who I think is going to get past that first round, is going to be able to weather that grappling storm, keep the fight on the feet the longer it goes on, put combinations together and really start putting it on Jourdain Levitt, hurting him, either finishing him or taking a decision, taking rounds 2 and 3 and picking Mateusz to win this fight. And that's it for this episode of the podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you're all going to enjoy the final UFC event of 2021. We're back in the middle of January. Again, as always, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel. If I've ever helped you win money with my analysis, with my breakdowns, my predictions, I'd really appreciate the support. And that's all from me, from all the team at MMA Play 365. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.